click until you get to 32 bits per channel, and then take the exposure effect and just adjust it until you get the right exposure to where it kind of looks like this, and there's some various depth to the layer. So, perfect. Now, we can start doing some stuff. We can do some stuff out of order, but ultimately we have to do it all. So, let's just get started. I'm going to create an adjustment layer. And this is going to be our depth of field. So, we'll hit return, type in DOF. And I like to use a plugin called Depth of Field. So, really cool. It is, again, a third-party plugin. I know that in CS 5.5 you can use the lens blur or the camera lens blur or something like that, and it works very similarly, but this is a really popular one, so check that out. I'm not going to embarrass myself by trying to say it. I don't need to say that kind of stuff to embarrass myself. I can do it all by myself. So I'm going to set the depth layer to the V-Ray Z depth pass. And the way the plugin works is you can turn up the depth of field amount. So we can set it to like 100. And so everything goes out of focus, and then we can select the point we want to be in focus. So if we look here and maybe move this point around, we can actually sort of rack focus to the pieces that are up front. And we can also animate this by animating the focal point. So this is actually how it was done in the original example. So we would rack focus on a piece that comes to the camera, and then it turns into the lens. So kind of a cool little trick there, and also just makes the background seem more mysterious because you can't quite see what's going on. So that is the depth of field. Now, it's really slow, so we're going to shut it off for now, but I'm glad it's set up. And another thing we may set up here early on is just some quick color correction. So create another adjustment layer. We'll hit return, hit CC, and we'll choose effect, color correction. I like to add a tint and curves adjustment. So pretty standard. We'll just bring some of the saturation in this. I mean, it's a pretty dark shot anyway, so you know, we can add a little contrast. Probably don't want to have a lot of red in this because it's supposed to be nighttime, so just play with it a little bit. Maybe brighten the shot up a little bit in the neutral. Now I want to create a really big shockwave, so like a displacement map for a shockwave. So the way we can do that, so make sure we save, is we can create a new solid, and we'll make it white, and I also want to make it square, so we'll make it 1920 by 1920, and then we'll take the ellipse tool and we'll click in the middle, and we're just going to create a sphere like that, so, or a circle. What I'm going to do is hit M, click on the stopwatch for the mask path, and we'll solo just this layer. And we'll hit MM, and maybe we'll actually set a keyframe for the mask expansion. We'll set the expansion down to a really, really low amount. And then we'll move forward just a couple seconds, and we'll crank up the expansion. There we go. And then we'll duplicate the mask, so we'll hit edit, duplicate. So now we have two of those. And we'll set the second one to subtract. Now, we're going to have to do something here. So let's zoom in. Let's offset the second one just a little bit. And that way, it creates a bit of a ring. And then at the very end, let's just make sure that we wipe it out entirely. And we can, of course, we can feather this a bit. And again, I'll just make sure we wipe it out entirely at the end there. So perfect. Now look at this. We'll come over here and we'll type in roughen edges, and we'll drop that onto our solid. So now we've got a cool looking effect there. Maybe we'll slide this over, make it a little thicker, and we can turn the sharpness down just a bit. So this looks pretty good for our shockwave. So what I'm going to do is pre-compose this. So we'll just trim the layer. Sorry, what I did there was I hit Alt begin bracket to trim it, and then I hit Alt Home, which brings it to the beginning of the comp, and then I can pre-compose it by just choosing Layer, Pre-compose, and we're going to move all the attributes into the new comp. But one thing I want to do is, because it goes out of the frame, let's go to the comp setting and set it to 1920 again, so that way it'll be full frame the whole time. Cool. All right, so we'll come back to our comp. We'll unsolo the shockwave, and let's set it to be a 3D layer. So now if we zoom in, we can take the rotation tool and flatten it down here a bit. Let's see. The glass is going to hit down about here. And we'll move the shockwave over to about that point in time. Maybe that's a little fast. So let's go in here and hit U. If we select all the keyframes, we can hold Alt, click the last keyframe, and drag it over, and that will actually slow it down a bit. So I don't know that we need it to be that much slower, but maybe a little slower. Okay, so that's what we want. Now I do want to pre-compose it, and we'll move all the attributes. And we'll call this shockwave. And we'll open it up, and I just want to create a quick background solid. So we'll set it to 50% gray, so we could do 0.5, 0.5, 0.5, and this will work perfectly for a displacement map. So we'll come back into our final comp, and we'll go ahead and shut the displacement layer off. And I'm going to create another adjustment layer, and this one's going to be called Displace. And we're going to type in displacement. We're going to take the displacement map plugin and drop it onto our adjustment layer. Then we'll select the shockwave layer, and let's bring it down just above the ground. So we can just solo those two layers. So if we look at this, see right there, we can start to see this shockwave kind of take over that ground. I think the idea is just to kind of be able to see it break across. So as it hits down, let me see if we can watch a little bit of this. One thing I like to do is set the preview to like skip 4 frames, and then set the frame rate really high, so it won't really be choppy anymore. I'll just play back at a faster frame rate. All right, so let's take a look here. So as it hits, we can see the shockwave kind of slide off. We're not looking at it in real time, so we don't want to make too many changes, but possibly we could slide this over a little bit so it happens a little bit sooner. There we go. Maybe even sooner than that. So that's pretty cool. We can scale that up and make it more intense, but I think that's good just for the basic idea of creating a ground shockwave, and we can crank that up and then fade the value out. Now we're going to be compositing another pass, which is kind of a smoke pass. So we'll take this fume effects pass that we created. Now I didn't go over this just because it's a little bit intense, but you can do some cool tutorials for fume effects, but you can also just use some effects that come with the Action Essentials collection that are a little bit easier to use and might work just as well. So we're going to color correct this fume effects pass, maybe make it smoke colored or like dust almost. And then we'll take a look. Alright, so this may be a little closer to the real-time speed. So it's extremely slow. We want to make sure that we, time our effects and everything to go with that much slower rate. So pretty good. Let's go ahead and add another kind of a lens flare effect. There's a couple of ways that I actually did this initially. We can take a new solid, and we could just call this lens flare, and we'll just type in optical flares, and we'll put that on our solid here. Now, optical flares is our plugin for creating lens flares and things. So let's go into the options here. Now, there's a couple of different ideas. So there's some really cool light presets that come with the plugin. We can do a really cool looking lens flare, or we can actually do something more simple. So if we come over here, I don't have a lot of room actually, but we go to the objects. We can add something like a lens orb, and so that kind of creates some specs on the lens. And if we go to the global parameters, we can even add a texture. So I don't know if any of you guys have noticed, but I think this texture or one of these is actually in the new Battlefield game. So while I was doing some research, flying helicopters and stuff, I happened to come across that and notice, and hey, it's pretty cool actually. So I still had to pay for the game, but what are you gonna do? All right, so we'll hit OK, and we'll go ahead and we'll keyframe this on to kind of light up our scene. So we'll set the transfer mode to add, and we'll move this down here, and basically I just want to turn the brightness up and down. So we want it to kind of come on exactly when this explodes, and then really fade off nicely. And another thing, I probably want to add a little contrast to this, I think, and then maybe give it a slightly more gold tone. Now that I'm looking at the surface area, I might go into the options again and add just like a quick streak, and that way it kind of fills that area of where it actually impacts. Alright, so let's go and turn our depth of field back on. So we'll put this right here. We'll turn our depth of field on. Probably want to set the focal point, and then maybe keyframe the focal point as we get a little larger, and maybe make it come forward a bit. So pretty cool. Maybe put the color correction above the flare. And this is going to take a little while, but maybe we could take a look. And another thing too, I noticed the glass is kind of blue looking instead of gold looking. So since it's a separate layer, let's see right here, we can actually go in and color correct it all by itself. So we could brighten it. We could take